Hello and welcome to the Alpha Software Demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software. Today we are going to be going back to basics when it comes to Alpha Anywhere. We're going to be stepping in some CRUD, that is, of course, create, read, update, and delete operations using UX controls. Now, this is some pretty basic stuff, but I've got some good stuff in here to review, so I think you probably will get something out of it. Before I get started, though, I just want to make sure that everyone can see my screen and can hear me. If you could just type something into the questions box or to the chat window, perfect. Thank you so much. Also, as a quick reminder, this is a Q&A session. You can ask questions. You could type them into the questions box or the chat window of the GoToWebinar control panel. You can also send questions at any time to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. So let's get started. Now, last week, I showed you a new application that was available for you to download called the Alpha Anywhere Test Drive application. And that application had a bunch of parts in it. It had a login screen, it had places to manage users, it had a to-do list, and a bunch of other things. Here's one of the screens that was in that application. This is the user details screen. And in it, when a user is logged in, they can change their first name, last name, company, and so on, and make changes to the record in their portal. Another example of a data entry screen is this one here. This is the one that was used in the to-do list. And this is the details screen. It also has got fields like the first one, but they were made in two different ways. This first one deals with what we called data binding directly to a UX. The next one has to do with data binding to a list. And here's actually a different view of that list right here. So you may have heard something about that. Maybe you only use lists, maybe you only use data binding UXs, but today we're going to talk about both of them, and we're going to really dive into the weeds in particular today on doing UX binding of fields. So there are two ways that you can, when you build an application in Alpha Anywhere, if you're using a UX and you want to use data in that UX, you can place fields directly in the UX and have that UX talk to your database. The other thing you can do is you can create fields in the UX, but then bind those fields to a list, and that list is then bound to a database. All right, that sounds kind of confusing, so I've made a diagram. Hopefully it will make it a little bit easier to follow. If you can take a look at this example here on the left, this is like the one that we did for the user details screen. We have some fields, maybe it's first name, last name, and company. They've been placed on what we call a UX control, and that UX control is directly connected to my SQL database so that the fields here know about the underlying data structure here. An alternate way to use fields with a database is through the use of a list control. So with a list control, the fields don't talk to the UX directly, they talk to the list control, and the list control talks to the SQL database. Now, the first one is very easy and straightforward to set up, although there are a couple little things that I want to show you again today if you haven't done it in a while that I think you're going to find useful. This one over here is also easy to set up, but it's not as easy, it's not as direct, but it gives you a bunch of features that you don't get from scenario one. If you use a list control on top of just being able to read and write to a database, you can use your data in an offline format, which is very cool. You could do data synchronization when a signal is restored. So if you've been collecting data out in the field and you need to restore that data, you can do that if you're using a list control. And list controls have got a great deal of flexibility when it comes to the format in which the data is presented. You could present it certainly as a list, as the name implies, like I showed you in the to-do list, but you can also do it as a Kanban control. You can do it as a map. With a little bit of JavaScript programming, you can do it as an interactive calendar, and you could do it as various types of freeform layouts. So there's an awful lot that you can do with a list control. It's a very, very powerful control, and it's one that I'll be showing to you next week. This week, though, we're going to deal with putting fields directly into a UX and how that works. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and pop over to my machine over here, my Windows desktop machine. And I'm going to open up Alpha Anywhere, which I thought was running, guess not. By the way, there was a new release of Alpha Anywhere, so you might want to check when you go into Alpha Anywhere and you choose that universal installer, also called Install Alpha Anywhere. You'll see that there was one that came out last week. There are release notes and stuff on that. We will talk about that in a future one. And then, but this week we're going to go dive back into that alpha test drive, and we're going to go take a look at binding data to a UX. So in the alpha test drive, here is one of the forms that was there, one of the UXs that was there. I'm going to show it to you in working preview. And when it loads, it just basically has got my user details, my first name, last name, company, and department. Now this has been wired up so that the currently logged in user, basically the system looks at who's logged in and retrieves just their data, and their data is presented here. Now I'm in working preview, so I'm not logged in, and so I'm not actually going to see my data here. Instead, what I would want to do is maybe do a dummy hard-coded example while I'm doing testing. And in fact, that's what I'm going to do, because I'm going to recreate a form very much like this one from scratch and show you how it went together. Okay, so let's create a new UX. And UX is one of the web components. The web component we tend to use more often because it works great on both mobile and on web, as opposed to the grids and the other ones, which are really just meant for more the desktop web sort of situations. All right, so I'm going to create a new UX component, and we're going to put some fields on it. Now, I have in my favorites list the fields that I use all the time. But if you didn't have anything in your favorites list, you might want to add some things. One way you could do it is you go down into data controls, find a control you like the text box. I use that one all the time. And you right click on that and you'd say add to favorites. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here to my favorites and I'm going to choose a text box. And one cool thing in Alpha is you can actually do multiple controls all at once. And that's a time saver when you're first setting up a form. So I'm going to say something like first name, last name, and company. And I'm going to click OK. And those forms will be placed directly on my UX. I can now save my UX if I want to. In fact, I do want to. I'm going to call it example 3. And if I take a look at this, and I've got my security framework turned on, I'm going to say always allowed so that I can always access this page because it's just for testing. So I'm going to go into working preview, and there are my 3 fields: first name, last name, and company. They are blank. And you'll notice they're not actually hooked up to anything. So we want to now connect these fields up to a SQL database. So the way that we're going to do that is by using something called data binding. It's right here over here on the left. So I'm going to click on data binding, and you'll see I have a few options. The first one is to create some new tables that match the controls of my UX component. That's very handy if I'm building something completely from scratch. But in this case, I want to use data controls of a table that already exists. And I'm going to be using the ones that are contained in our Alpha test drive application. Let's go take a look at that database here in SQLite Studio because it's a SQLite database. But what I'm showing you today applies to any kind of database, not just SQLite. It works on SQL Server, MariaDB, you name it. It'll work. It also works in NoSQL too. So here's our database. It's called the Alpha Test Drive database. And in it, one of the tables that we're going to be using today is called the AA System Extended User Info table. Let me just double click to select that. And let's take a look at the data in the table. It has a bunch of user IDs in it, which are basically email addresses. And it's got first names and some last names and some companies. So that is the table that we're going to be using today. I just wanted to show you the data that was in it. So we're going to pop back over to Alpha Anywhere. And we're going to bind the controls on our UX to one or more of the existing tables. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to say, okay, great. Which table do I want to specify? So I'm going to click Specifies Tables. And the first thing it's going to ask for is my connection string, which has already been created for you in this example. And I've called it CONN, which is pretty standard naming. And in that connection string, which connects the database, I'm going to choose a particular table. So we'll choose table, select table name, and there is my extended user info table right there. Okay. Now I'm going to say, is this going to be read-only? No, because we want to be able to update it. So I'm going to leave that unchecked. It's going to ask what the primary key field is, but it already knows that it's the user ID. So I'm going to leave it just alone like that. Last question, is this automatically created? We're going to leave that alone as well, because we're actually not going to be making new records. We're going to be editing records that are already in the table. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK on that. And then I'm going to say, I want to bind the UX component controls to table fields. So I'm going to click on that. And here are my 3 table fields. And let's go ahead and click automatically map. So let's do that. And you'll see it found that I've named my fields the same here as they are in the database, so it was able to automatically map them up for me. If it didn't do one, and I'll show you an example where it doesn't in a second, I can actually do that manually. So let's go ahead into controls, because I realize I left out a control. I want to put in a control for ID. This isn't something the user is going to be able to edit, but it'll be helpful for us just to see it. So I'm going to add that ID field. I'm going to move that up to the top. And now that I'm here in the ID field, there are a couple ways that I can bind that data again. I can go back into the data binding and I can say refresh, sorry, not refresh, bind the controls. And you'll see that my one for ID is there, but it's blank. It's not bound to anything. So there are 2 ways I can update it, but the easy way here is I just double click and I tell it that the ID that I want is going to be the user ID. It's going to be this field. So I'm going to bind this ID to this field called user ID. Now we are all in business. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click Save. And now you're probably thinking, if I go into working preview, I'm going to see my data. But some of you know that that's not the case. Let's go take a look though. And voila, here are my fields. And I've connected it to the database, but you'll notice I don't see any data here in these fields, because there's one more thing that we need to do after we bind it, and that is that we need to actually load the data into the fields. And we do that by executing a little piece of code. So I'm going to go back here into controls, and this is just as an example. At first, we're going to add a button. You can find buttons here in other controls, but it's one of my favorites, so I've added it here. So I'm going to click button, and I'm going to say load records. Is what I can spell. And I'll click OK on that, load records. And now I'm going to double click on this to define a new action. And the action that I'm going to write, I'm just going to type in the word key here and filter. I'm going to say, get the primary key values for records in the query. So what it says is it's going to execute a query and retrieve the primary key values as well as the data to data-bound UX components. It says this action is only intended if for an event on a UX component. I'll show you that event in a second. You can still use it in a button. I'm going to click OK on that. And OK again. And OK. Let me save. And now I'm going to go into working preview. And you'll notice every time I go into working preview, now that I've set up data binding, I'm going to get this dialog box. That dialog box is going to ask me to see if it wants me to check to see if something has changed in the underlying database. I find this one kind of annoying, and I prefer to just update it myself. So I tend to just shut off this dialog box by saying, do not show this, do not show. And I'm going to say, no, don't refresh the data binding. Okay, so here are my fields. Now I'm going to run that little script that loads the records. And lo and behold, there comes the data right out of the database and right into my field right here. Okay, well, that's kind of cool, but there's an issue, and that is that it's pulled up this record here, not necessarily the record that I wanted. Let's take a look in the database. You'll see it's by user ID, and in alphabetically, Cheddar is the one there. That came first in the user ID, so that's the one that I wanted. But I actually want to filter this on a particular record. So how do I do that? Well, first thing I'm going to do is I am going to go back here and I'm going to create what is called an argument. So an argument is a value that I can safely store. Think of it as like a safety feature when filtering records in your database. An argument is used instead of just creating a regular type of filter because an argument is, let's call it more robust, and it stops something from happening called SQL injection. I won't get into that, but I will say always use an argument when you're doing a filter, period. Okay, so here we are in properties. I'm going to type in the word argument, and I'm going to create a new argument, and we'll call it ID. Because I want to do a filter on that list, and I only want to show the record where the ID matches my ID. So there it is right here. It's told me the data type is character, which is fine. And then it says get argument value from. I can say set at runtime, but I have a couple other options in here, one of which is cool. It's called get value from current logged in user. I'm going to choose that one. And then I can choose whichever logged in user I want. I can just say logged in username. I could choose user ID. It's going to be the same in this case. And then when I run this component, that ID is going to see if I'm logged in. And if I am logged in, it's going to use my user ID. And so I've created an argument called ID. Let me go ahead and click OK on that. So you're saying, well, why did I go about doing all that? Well, I'll show you, because we're going to go back now into our UX. Can leave the properties section alone. And this time we're going to edit that action. We're going to edit that one that loaded the fields. So instead of loading all the records and then just showing me the first one, I want you to show me a specific record. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the base filter. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and click here on this smart field. And I'm going to set a condition. I'm going to say only show me the records where the user ID is equal to, and then I'm going to insert my argument. And the argument here is the one I just created. So this will automatically filter my record so it only shows the one for the current user. It's exactly what I want. The problem is that we're going to be working in working preview now for a few minutes. And because I won't be logged in, this functionality isn't going to work. So just for now, I'm just going to go ahead and hard code that filter so that it points to a different user. And I'm going to have it point to user1@alpha.com. Let's take a look in the database just to make sure that that's a real user. Yep, user1@alpha.com is a good user. Perfect. So that's going to be it. So I'm going to click OK. And so now when I save this, I'm going to go into working preview. And I click load record. Instead of loading Cheddar, it loads user1@alpha.com. It filters it and shows it the right thing. Okay, that's pretty cool. But I don't want to have to push this load record button every single time. So instead of doing that here, I'm not going to do this button here. I'm in fact going to erase that button. Instead, I want to run that same code whenever when I first load up my component. So for example, when I'm on the client side and I say on initialize complete, I can do that here. I could say add action JavaScript, or I could also do it server side. I think I've done it both places and I don't think it really mattered, but let's go with on dialog initialize. I go down here, I'm going to choose action scripting. So we'll do it in XBasic. And you'll notice I've got a bunch of, actually several predefined actions that I can do. So I don't really have to do any coding. So again, here I am Events, server side, I'm choosing the on dialog initialize event. I'm up to action scripting, and I'm going to choose save submitted data to tables. When I click on that, you'll see I get a dialog box that gives me some options. One of the options is what happens after I submit it. And I can say, oh, leave me at the same place, or maybe take me to a thank you page or something like that. So you could redirect to another page if you wanted to. You could enter another record if you were set this up so that you were meant to enter a whole bunch of things in a row. That might make sense. Or you could stay on the record that you just submitted and maybe show a message that the record was saved successfully. I'm going to go ahead and click OK on that. Whoop, and let's set up my base filter while I'm here. Let's control, fade out. I'm going to go back into this here. I'm going to choose, whoops, I'm sorry, I chose the wrong one. I choose the wrong one. I got ahead of myself. All right, hang on a second. If the person editing this is watching, please go back about 60 seconds. We're going to go into action scripting, and this time we are going to instead choose, we're going to choose a different action. The action we're going to choose is the one that loads the records into the table, which is called load primary keys from parent. Sorry about that. So here we are, load primary keys from parent. I've clicked that. Again, a dialog box appears. I'm going to want to filter that table. The filter is going to be user ID equals, and again, I could insert an argument, but instead I'm going to go with user1@alpha.com. And I've done this properly. Once I have saved this, then when I go and I do look at it in working preview, it should automatically load the record for me, which it has. Okay, that is great, except that, oh, I'm seeing here in the questions window. Yeah, I definitely got the wrong action on that one. Thanks very much. So I'll go back and check questions in a moment too. Thank you. All right, so here we are back here. It's working, it's loaded up what we wanted to, except what we now have got is a problem, and that is that how do we go ahead and like make changes to this? I guess I can click in, for example, and it does let me edit it. So I could say like Alpha Software Inc. But there's no save button, change button. If I press enter, nothing happens because I haven't added that functionality yet to my form. So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to go back into design, and there are under controls, some controls that are already built for me. They are called defined controls. And under defined controls, I'm going to find the one that is called submit reset. Let me just scroll down to that. Submit reset. There we go. Now, when I insert this, I have a choice. It says, do you want these controls to become operative under what circumstance? When you've made a change to any field, or when you've made a change to any field that happens to also be connected to the database? In this case, it doesn't matter. I leave it on the first one. So we'll click OK, so that it would change in any case. It happens to be, though, that all my fields are connected to the database, so I'm not going to worry about that. So here's all my fields. Here's my submit and my reset button, and I'm getting closer. Go ahead and save that, and I'm going to click working preview. And for example, Alpha Software Corp, I'm going to change that to Inc. And I'm going to click submit, and nothing happens. And why does nothing happen? Well, a couple of things did actually happen in the background. When I clicked the submit button, it went to execute code, and it went to see if there was an event tied into what we call the after validate event. That is, after it made sure that everything on this form was copacetic, it went to run the code that would actually submit it back to the database. The problem is we haven't actually inserted that code yet. So that's the piece that we're going to do now. It was actually the one that I jumped the gun on just a moment ago. So let's go ahead into button submit. I'm going to double click on that, and we are going to, oops, that's not right. Let's go into events, and we can go into server-side events on after dialog validate. So after we're sure that the values are good, we now want to save everything here to the database. So let me just scroll down to the end here, and I'm going to insert some action JavaScript. In this case, we're going to say save submitted data to tables. Clicked OK on that. OK again. And now it says, OK, what do you want to do? Do you want to redirect? I don't want to redirect. I want to just keep it here on the same record that I just entered, just in case maybe I want to make another change or something. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click Save. Let's go over to Working Preview. And now I'm going to change that from Alpha Software Corp to Alpha Software Inc. I'm going to click the Submit button. And you'll notice that my change is taken. You've seen that now that these two buttons have become grayed out. If I go back in to design and I come back to Working Preview, when the values are loaded back in, you'll see incorporated stayed like it was supposed to. Likewise, if I hit submit, it now changes it back to how it was before. So now we've got pretty much everything working the way that we want to. There's one last thing though we'd like to do just as a nicety, and that is to let someone know that the record actually was changed successfully. Simply having the buttons become dimmed is probably not enough of a reassurance. But you'll notice in here, when we're looking at that after dialog event, if I put my mouse here, I can go back here and I can actually edit that action JavaScript, edit that script by going up into action scripting and choosing Edit Action. And you'll see one of the options that I have is to show a fade out message after the record is saved. And that message, I can choose the text, but that record says record was saved. It lets me say how long should the message be displayed. I'm going to say 2000 milliseconds, 2 seconds basically. And the placeholder ID where it should be shown. I don't have a placeholder ID. Let's cancel out and put in a placeholder. So I'm going to go back into Working Preview, and we'll put the placeholder, I guess, underneath these buttons here. So let's go back into Controls. There. We're going to add a new control. And by clicking Add New Control, I can search through all of my controls. One of the controls happens to be called Placeholder. There it is. Just going to grab it. And it's given it a name called Placeholder 1. That's fine. I'm not going to change it. You might if you wanted to get more specific if you had a bunch of placeholders, but I don't in this case. So I'm going to go back now into the event in which the record is saved. Oops. Scroll down to the end. Come on. There it is. I'm going to again edit this action. And now I'm going to say that I am going to display a fade out message, and the placeholder is going to be the one that was just created, placeholder 1. So I'm going to click OK on that, and I'm going to click Save. We're going to go over to Working Preview. And now I'm going to make a change here. Change that to ink again. Click Submit. And look, there we go, record was saved. Now, one thing I didn't have to create a placeholder for was what happens when you hit the reset button. That's actually built in for you. If I click reset, it says, are you sure you want to reset this form? You can click OK on that. And you have options to change how that works back when you're editing that script. So that covers what I wanted to cover today when it came to connecting up UX controls using different fields, as we did in our sample application here. Let's see if there are any other questions. Someone said, oh, does reset work? It does work. We just checked that out. Someone said, oh, I missed last week. Can you post the download for the test drive app again? I absolutely can. I think it's actually here in this PowerPoint. So maybe if I just scroll forward, I'll find it. Yeah, here it is. This is the link. Let me try to grab that link. So I put it up on GitHub, github.com/alphaanywhere, all one word, all lowercase, /alpha test drive. In this case, we went camel case, so it's the first capitalized in each case. And I'm going to go ahead and paste that into the chat window. And I believe the video for that on how it works is already posted on the YouTube channel. So we are going to continue. Someone said, are you going to continue to add functionality and enhancements to the test drive application? I am. First, I'm going to, over the next couple of sessions, they'll probably just explain how is there, what's working, what else is not working there. I'm going to basically show you how to use the features that are there and how they were put there. Then we'll start adding in additional functionality. I'm going to be taking a look at dashboards and API integration and AI and all kinds of stuff. And if there's anything you'd be interested in, go ahead and send it in to guides@alphasoftware.com. We'd be happy to add that in. Another question, any estimate when the docs and demo for Firestore will happen? Let me just take a quick look over at Alpha Anywhere. Actually, I think that we have made some progress in the latest release, but I might be wrong. Let me take a look though before I say otherwise. So here we are in Alpha Anywhere. I have the latest release running, and I'm going to go into Help, and we're going to go into Release Notes. I'm going to say Current. I'm going to just do a Control Find for Firestore. There we go, Firestore Explorer. Yes, we have added videos as recently as, well, it looks like last week. So go take a look at the release notes for using Firestore with the demo and things like that. Cool. All right, well, that looks like it's it for questions. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining me today. Hope to see you at our next Wednesday's Alpha Software Demo and Q&A webcast. Until then, keep questions coming. You can send them into guides@alphasoftware.com. Till then, take care. Thank you, and goodbye.